Today, we're jumping into a really heavy topic, one that's frankly concerning for the whole world. The potential for, well, a full-scale war between Israel and Iran. Our mission today is pretty straightforward. We want to explore how a conflict like that could actually play out. Who might get dragged into it, what the consequences could be, both regionally and globally. And yeah, we have to talk about that really unsettling question. Could this spin out into something much bigger? Maybe even what people are calling World War III. So we're going to try and distill the key insights from the sources you've shared, give you a clear, unbiased look at the stakes. We're focusing purely on the mechanics, the potential outcomes. Okay, so this rivalry between Israel and Iran, it's not new, right? It's been brewing for decades. But maybe you can unpack that a bit. What are the historical tensions that have really brought us, well, right here, to this brink? Why now?
Right. It's crucial to understand that this wasn't always the case.
Yeah.
Before 1979, believe it or not, Iran and Israel had this kind of quiet, pragmatic relationship. But the Iranian Revolution completely changed the game. Ayatollah Khomeini came in and declared Zionism an enemy of Islam. So what was maybe a state-to-state issue became deeply ideological, almost existential. And since then, Iran's strategy has been very consistent, building this network of proxy forces, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, Shia militias in Iraq, Syria.
Right, the axis of resistance, as they sometimes call it.
Exactly. And these groups aren't random. They're all lined up with Tehran's big goals, pushing back against the U.S. and, critically, containing Israel, boxing it in. Now, Israel, for its part, hasn't just sat back. Because the last decade plus, they've been conducting these pretty regular airstrikes across Syria, Lebanon, hitting Iranian link assets.
The war between wars, they called it.
That's the one.
Yeah.
But things shifted dramatically after the October 7th Hamas attack.
Yeah.
Our sources indicate that attack had broad support from Iran. And now, Israel is openly saying it will retaliate directly against Iran for recent strikes. That's the big change. We're now in a state of direct confrontation, not just through proxies. It's unprecedented, really.
That really clarifies how decades of this simmering tension, this proxy conflict, has suddenly boiled over into something direct and much more dangerous. So given that, what could actually light the fuse? What's the spark that ignites an all-out war?
Well, and this is key, the spark could come from either side. It's not a one-way street. Iran could, for instance, launch a major strike using ballistic missiles, maybe drones, possibly routed through Hezbollah, hitting Israeli territory hard. Or you could see Israel deciding to launch a large-scale operation, maybe hitting Iran's nuclear sites, which is obviously a huge red line, or key military bases.
And the moment that happens,
the escalation would be almost immediate. You'd see casualties rising fast, allies getting involved very quickly. It would spiral. And we need to be clear about what this war would look like. It wouldn't be like World War II, tanks rolling across borders in the traditional sense.
Right.
It would be classic hybrid warfare. Think cyber attacks taking down power grids or communications. Huge barrages of missiles, swarms of drones, overwhelming defenses, and then all the proxy fighting kicking into high gear, Hezbollah, Hamas, others.
And the battlefield itself.
Massively expanded, not just focused on one border. You're looking at potential simultaneous fronts in Lebanon, Syria, Gaza, Yemen, maybe even attacks inside Iran. It's complex, multi-layered.
Wow. So not just boots on the ground, but this tangled mess of cyber, missile, drone, proxy actions all over the place.
Right.
Which makes you think, the Middle East is already such a tinderbox. Once this fire starts, who else gets burned? Who gets pulled in almost immediately?
Yeah, that's where the regional picture gets really dicey. You have actors who are almost certain to jump in. Hezbollah in Lebanon, that's almost a guarantee. They'd likely open up a northern front against Israel. They have, tens of thousands of rockets, many pointed right at Tel Aviv, Haifa.
Forcing Israel into a two-front war at least.
Exactly, instantly. Then you have Hamas in Gaza. Even weakened, they still have value for Iran tying up Israeli forces, symbolic importance. And don't forget the Houthis down in Yemen. Backed by Iran, they could easily ramp up attacks on Red Sea shipping again.
Which disrupts global trade and pulls in outside naval forces.
Precisely. Western navies would likely have to get involved just to keep those sea lanes open. And then you have the big players, the global powers. The U.S. stands firmly with Israel. A major attack on Israel, especially, God forbid, with WMDs, puts immense pressure on the U.S. to intervene militarily.
And on the other side,
Russia and China. They have deep ties with Iran. Now, they probably wouldn't declare war directly. That seems unlikely. But they could provide diplomatic cover at the UN, maybe intelligence support, possibly even military hardware. And that's how this potentially morphs from a regional fight into a Well, a proxy war between the world's major powers.
It really paints a picture of this intricate web, doesn't it? Alliances, rivalries, how quickly it could expand. So let's try and visualize this. Walk us through a plausible scenario. If this war starts, how might it unfold, say, step by step?
Okay, a plausible, though deeply concerning scenario could start like this. Phase 1, a massive missile exchange. Iran launches, say, dozens of ballistic missiles, maybe drones too, aimed at Israeli cities, military sites. Israel activates its defenses, Iron Dome for shorter range, David's Sling arrow for longer range threats. But realistically, some will get through. You'll have casualties, damage.
And Israel's response?
Phase 2, swift and heavy retaliation. Israeli air power hitting targets inside Iran military bases, missile launch sites, maybe even attempting to strike nuclear facilities. Plus, you'd likely see major cyber attacks launched by Israel trying to cripple Iranian infrastructure.
Then the proxies really join the fray.
That's phase 3. Hezbollah unleashes its rocket arsenal on northern Israel. Thousands of rockets, causing huge disruption, forcing mass evacuations from Israeli towns near the border. Israel hits back hard in Lebanon with artillery, airstrikes, maybe even ground operations. A major northern front opens up.
And this stays regional, or...
Phase 4 is where it potentially spills over. You could see attacks on oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, a vital global choke point. That likely brings in the U.S. Navy in force, maybe aircraft carriers deployed to the Persian Gulf. Tensions spike globally. NATO allies start debating what to do.
And the worst-case scenario?
Phase 5.
Yeah.
This is the truly chilling part. If either side feels it's facing an existential threat, that it's truly losing catastrophically, the temptation to use unconventional weapons, chemical, biological, maybe even tactical nuclear weapons becomes terrifyingly real, especially given Israel's policy of nuclear ambiguity. If they felt their existence was on the line, well, it's the ultimate escalation.
That's a frighteningly rapid cascade of events. The destruction, the impact on civilians, just immense. Which brings us to a really critical question many people wonder about. Can Israel actually survive that? A prolonged, full-scale, multi-front war against Iran and its proxies?
Look, Israel has undeniable strengths. Very advanced military tech, a highly trained and frankly battle-hardened military, top-tier intelligence. But a war like this would pose enormous challenges maybe unlike any they've faced before. Think about population density. Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, major cities, very vulnerable to sustained missile barrages.
And resources.
Big concern. Water infrastructure, power grids, food supply chains, all could be targeted, disrupted. Modern society is fragile in that sense. And military fatigue is real. The IDF is already stretched from operations in Gaza, fighting a high-intensity war on potentially 3 or 4 fronts simultaneously. That tests reserves, manpower, everything.
What about the international angle?
That's crucial, too. If the war drags on and civilian casualties mount, especially Palestinian casualties, if Gaza gets drawn in further, or casualties in Lebanon, global opinion could shift hard against Israel. You could see increasing diplomatic isolation, pressure for ceasefires, maybe even sanctions.
But they do have strong allies.
Absolutely, particularly the United States. That alliance is a huge factor. U.S. support, military resupply, intelligence, diplomatic backing could be the decisive element that allows Israel to sustain the fight and ultimately survive. So could Israel survive? Yes, probably. But the cost would be staggering in lives lost, economic ruin, long-term security challenges, societal trauma, huge.
It really underscores the devastating human cost, even for a nation as militarily capable as Israel. So let's broaden out again. What does this all mean for the rest of us, for the world? Could this conflict actually genuinely lead to World War III?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The absolute nightmare scenario. The key trigger, the point where this really risks going global, is likely direct U.S. military intervention against Iran. If the U.S. starts launching strikes on Iranian soil, for instance, that's when Russia and China face immense pressure to respond more forcefully, given their ties to Tehran.
And that's when we cross the threshold.
That's when you're definitely stepping into global conflict territory. You can imagine geopolitical alignments hardening very quickly, maybe NATO members versus the Shanghai Cooperation Organization members, or some similar alignment. Then you'd see the conflict metastasize, widespread cyber warfare hitting critical infrastructure globally, naval clashes not just in the Gulf, but maybe the Mediterranean, the South China Sea, and the economic fallout. Catastrophic. Oil prices through the roof, global trade seizing up, sanctions crippling economies worldwide.
So what does World War III even mean in this context? Are we talking full-scale nuclear exchange?
Probably not the Cold War-style all-out nuclear apocalypse between the U.S. and Russia. That still seems unlikely, hopefully. But the risk of regional nuclear exchanges, That, unfortunately, cannot be dismissed entirely. If the conflict spirals and draws in other nuclear or near-nuclear powers in the region or connected regions, think Pakistan, maybe India getting involved through their own rivalries, the risk goes up. So maybe World War III isn't one single massive war like the last two. Perhaps it's more like a series of overlapping, interconnected, major regional wars involving most of the great powers. That seems, well, entirely possible if things escalate that far.
It's sobering. The interconnectedness really means a fire in one region can set the whole world ablaze, or at least parts of it. So let's imagine, somehow, the fighting stops eventually. What's left? What's the aftermath look like? What are the scars that last for generations?
The aftermath would be grim, just devastating on multiple levels. For the Middle East itself, think massive numbers of displaced people, refugees, cities potentially in ruins, infrastructure destroyed. You'd likely see a surge in extremism filling the power vacuums, chaos spreading, fragile states collapsing entirely. For Israel, even if they win militarily, they'd likely face a fundamental rethink of their whole security concept. Huge internal political debates, maybe shifts in foreign policy, deep societal wounds.
And Iran.
Iran could face, well, depending on how badly the war goes for them, maybe even regime change. But certainly economic devastation on a scale hard to comprehend, and probably even deeper isolation internationally and globally. The impact ripples out everywhere. International institutions like the UN might be severely weakened, seen as ineffective. You could see a new global arms race kick off.
A new Cold War dynamic?
Quite possibly. Renewed Cold War dynamics between the U.S., China, Russia. Plus, the energy crisis from disrupted oil supplies, the economic downturn. These would affect daily life for people everywhere. The scars would be deep and long-lasting, reshaping geopolitics for decades.
This deep dive really brings home the sheer complexity, the gravity of a potential Israel-Iran war. Our aim here, as always, was just to lay out the potential dynamics, the stakes, based on the sources, without taking any sides ourselves. Hopefully, we've given you a clearer, if sobering, picture.
And perhaps it leaves us all with a question to think about. In this world that's so interconnected now, where regional conflicts end and global ones begin? Is there even a clear line anymore? And how does really understanding those connections, those potential ripple effects, change how we think about stability or maybe the illusion of stability?
A powerful thought. Conflict is never truly inevitable, but understanding its potential shape and consequences, that's absolutely essential.